Hello everybody, and welcome to an exciting edition of Token Topics, one that you're not going to want to miss. I had the pleasure of interviewing Son White, who is head of ecosystem and business development for the XDC Network in Australia. So this is quite a big deal. We're going to not only hear about his background and his work history, which he's very intelligent. He has a lot of experience in not just blockchain, but other areas. He's going to give us some insights of the industry, what's currently going on. We're going to hear great news about Subnets, also XDC Trade Network, and the overall outlook for blockchain in Australia. So we're going to touch on these and a lot of other topics, so you're not going to want to miss this video. To stay informed, you can follow Son on Twitter. I'm going to put that information in the description. Son also has a YouTube channel to subscribe to. All the information is in the description. All right, Son White, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm curious, as well as the audience, I'm sure, your work history, if you can give us a rundown of some of your background and how you started work for XinFin.
Well, Brian, let me just say it's been a pleasure to kind of meet you sort of in person, I guess, over the last few weeks. I know you definitely sort of chime in a little bit to some of my LinkedIn posts when I'm posting as the XDC Business Development Ecosystem Manager here in Australia. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Brian, thank you, Brian. It's an interesting story, and I tend to have different versions or different lengths of my story. But basically, I'm probably what you would call a polymath, though I'm certainly not a genius level. I have my strengths, but overall, I'm a holistic thinker. And deep down, I'm a creative as well. I've studied and practiced visual arts. But I'm also a little bit of an opinionator. So without the typical dogma that's often seen or heard in such of those personality traits. But early on, I had this artistic ability and appetite. And at odds with that, I was also intellectually and academically motivated. But my path led into medical sciences as a graduate of molecular genetics and biochemistry at the University of Queensland. And after initially enrolling in biotech and then spending a good deal of my time in medical sciences, I went off and did diagnostics as a trade in all three areas of service, including research and development. But then I completed a diploma of visual arts, and then I was a practicing artist, so I took a little bit of time off from that. And I exhibited in Australia and the UK. And I was once even shortlisted for the prestigious and coveted Brett Whiteley International Travelling Scholarship Award, which would have been fantastic if I pulled that off, but alas. But I still went over to the UK a couple of years later and had a great experience painting, exhibiting, whilst also being a medical scientist. Yeah, so over a decade of that phase, I broke out of it, went to holistic therapies. No, I didn't go straight into blockchain then. I was going to do a master's of physio, but then I decided it was too limiting. I guess after all the visual arts, I probably came a lot more in touch with my artistic and creative side. And that led me down a more of a holistic healing path, and went into a small business. For 13 years, I operated quite successfully and had thousands and thousands, 10,000s of clients over a 14-year period. So that, in a nutshell, I guess, is my story, work history-wise. And you can probably join the dots and read into my travel experiences as well. But then I went, I guess, with the pre-COVID days and also having a young family, I looked at what would be good investments? How can I start looking at my, financial security? And I went into precious metals. So I had a couple of years of stacking silver and gold. And then I became a little bit more aware of blockchain through Ethereum and a little bit into Bitcoin. And I pretty much had a little dabble, but then it was probably not till 2020, 2021 that I got a little bit more serious. And I think XDC was like the third coin I held, and I still hold. And I got very much into the community. And so at some point, I got a tap on the shoulder to kind of get a little bit more serious about it. It must be said I'm a little bit of an anomaly in the halls of XinFin and XDC Network, but everyone there has made me feel very welcome and appreciated. I came in with a very well executed multi-city blockchain week sponsorship. We had a major sponsorship last year in June. That included the protocol team giving a workshop in Brisbane, myself paneling in Sydney, and I presented in Brisbane as well. Dr. Fisher Yu was paneling in Melbourne, and we had Sunil Senapati participating live in an International Landscape Day web event, which actually included Caitlin Long, Hester Pierce, and other notables.
Wow, yeah.
So, you know, my transition from all that work history into blockchain and then into a community builder in the space, and then being asked to take on blockchain week, that was my idea, and it was very successful.
Excellent, yeah.
So that was a big splash.
Idea, huh?
Yeah, and I got a great
Very
deal.
Good. Very good.
They really appreciated XDC Network's involvement in Australia, and that's really set up a real strong platform and springboard, really. But yeah, I'm not your typical IT nut or financial magnate. I'm really just a community guy who has strong small business experience, and you know, when XDC Network talks about being community driven, they really do stand by that. And you know, I figure there's so many other very knowledgeable people in IT, coding, and finance. I think they can afford to have the token creative and science nut to kind of get in there as well.
Very good. Very well. So as far as your experience working with the XDC network, how's your experience been so far? I
tend to represent the you know, a lot of community interests and a lot of community building. So in that case, it really brings me face to face with a lot of developer groups here in Australia. It's a very fresh market, I guess. There's been a lot of Ethereum and layer 2 sort of focus over the last 10 years here, and
big time, yeah.
It's very, very interesting. You know, there's a lot of really good DeFi communities here, so I've really connected well with them. And but you know, it is interesting to kind of come in as the outsider, outsider network, and oftentimes you kind of say, hey, you know, you introduce yourself, what you do, and they say, oh, another layer 1. And it's like, well, yeah, sure, but it's a layer 1. It's probably the biggest layer 1 you've never heard of. And then you kind of go through, and it's okay. It's okay to kind of not be well known, because our use case, or the wedge that we got into with blockchain and Web3, was an area which a lot of younger people, especially a lot of tech people, don't necessarily have any connection with. You know, the trade, international trade, yeah, private debt, tokenization, or even real world asset tokenization. It's not something that is front and center. It's obviously still very much a casino type attitude when it comes to crypto. And you know, the real world utility stuff is something which even the best of the EVM developers here in Australia it stops at DeFi, and it doesn't kind of take that next step to on-chain asset sort of representations. But that's what I'm here for. I love a challenge, and someone from the traditional finance or traditional coding background wouldn't make that step, wouldn't be interested in taking that step. And maybe that's probably why I got tapped, because I was more than willing to take that step. And but you know, as this whole story unfolds, Brian, we're going to get more and more people from that Web3 background, more so than someone like me, who's more of a creative and small business orientated background. We're going to get more and more of these people coming over to our side, and specifically to XDC, and having that real utility focus. And I'm loving it. I'm loving that sort of opportunity to kind of break that ice. And yeah, so recently, just to really answer your question, recently I've spoken at depth to some of the co-founders at Fathom. In fact, I'm going to be also talking to you know, a member of the plugin Oracle team soon, Sawa and Sunil of TradeFinex and XDC Trade Network, respectively. I'm on very good terms with them, and we talk pretty often. This might be a great little opportunity to maybe give you something juicy.
Sure. Hey, let's have it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you ask about, what's happening in Australia, and my connections and whatnot, but it's obviously too soon to kind of give names, but part of what I do here is, and it's very broad. There's a lot of use cases and utility for XDC Network, but one of my specially special to me anyway is that whole SMEs. And one of our great desires as a network is to have local onboarding, digitization of trade and bills of lading, for instance, and for every part of this region. Maybe obviously at every country and every nation, to have a local onboarding developer team and business team that obviously runs independent of XDC Network and potentially independent of XDC Trade Network, that Sunil runs as well. But essentially something that integrates interfaces, I know with Yoda Plus and I think DTG in America. We are building out regional digitization partners, and I'm pleased to say in Australia, it looks as though I've got a very strong dev team that is very much XDC focused, and whilst they are a fairly new team, they've come from very good stock when it comes to financial backgrounds, especially with regulation tech, and they're proving themselves to be capable. So I imagine in the next couple of months we'll be able to make more of a public announcement, but more importantly, they're going to really offer a practical local Australian and New Zealand and Pacific, pathway for SMEs and corporates to onboard their documents for that whole XDC Trade Network, digitization of trade finance and trade documentation. So really, really stoked to see, little dominoes falling within in the area. I've only really been here for 8 months, and probably almost 2 of those months I was on leave, unpaid leave. So, really juicy stuff there. We're going to have a great team providing that infrastructure for Australian businesses to onboard and take part in this whole Web3 digital trade
it's revolution,
digital economy. Yeah, exactly.
Some people, they think that, they hear all this good news about tokenizing data, tokenizing, documents and everything. But I don't want them to get confused with what do you think's really going to bring the value and actually make the price move?
Price movement. Yeah. Well, on the utility alone, I believe it's one of those exponential things. But that being said, we have a lot of infrastructure to build out to kind of actually absorb that digital trade functionality. I mean, if just for instance, I know there's a massive trade finance gap, and but we need to kind of make sure we have the liquidity there to kind of meet that. So some of that is based on the established incumbent sort of lenders, traditionally banks, I guess, to kind of participate in those sorts of pools, I guess, on TradeFinex. But in the actual infrastructure of getting parcels and shipping containers and whatnot from A to B to C, we're talking about certain countries. I mean, France is actually a good example of how simple it can be. But when you think about maybe the Philippines or Indonesia, we're talking about an archipelago of, tens of thousands of islands. There's going to be a real reliance on, smart devices, phones, and all the rest of it. But there is only so much that trade gap can be closed with certain countries where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of demand, but there's the infrastructure is really quite cumbersome. So I think there is going to be, maybe I'm looking at more abstract and more philosophically on that angle, but I do believe that, when it looks to price appreciation, I'm just talking about utility here and adoption. We are getting more MLETR being adopted every single year, and that is ramping up. We do have standalone approaches when it comes to trade finance and trade document digitalization. So, these two things will probably sort of not necessarily be shoulder to shoulder, but at some point when there's a critical mass hit and more regions are on board, these two will probably rise together in utility, and then price appreciation. But the efficiency and the cheapness of the gas fee, I don't think XDC Network would ever make it such that we kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So I can't ever see it being like an Ethereum situation where when there's a bull run that global trade just grinds to a halt because it's just ridiculously expensive to use the gas. But my crystal ball says that the more institutions that start seeing things like subnets on XDC as a useful and a secure way of moving forwards in Web3, and then obviously things like the DAO, being a shot of confidence into the business and enterprise and government sectors, giving that confidence that it's an even representation and a methodical approach to on-chain governance. I think these things will probably drive interest in XDC as a token itself.
See that as being the driving force?
Yeah, I definitely do think for an enterprise-ready blockchain, you need to give confidence to enterprise. It's simple as that. We're not trying to convince hordes of meme casino token type chasers. We're here to convince enterprise. To do that, you need to act like an enterprise, and a decentralized enterprise at that. But we definitely need to grow up, level up, and really walk that talk of being a well-governed and also not just a well-governed, but a very serious player in Web3.
Can you please give me some insights into how it's being, how is the industry molding right now?
You probably ask this question to everyone, don't you? Because it's a good yardstick to see.
Oh yeah, soak up knowledge. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those. Everyone's got a different lens and a different sort of expectation on how long is this all going to take.
Yeah.
The whole Web3 transition and beyond.
And developments in Australia, what are blockchain developments going on?
Yeah. We don't get to hear a lot what's happening in Australia, and it's there's certain industries in Web3 which Australia are doing really, really well, punching well above its weight. One project, and I don't mind mentioning it, they're not built on XDC, but Immutable is doing fantastic stuff in gaming in particular. That's something worth looking into, and just realizing that there is really strong developer community and really strong business support. I was just recently at a policy forum, which was convened by Blockchain Australia, putting together advisement, and that's something sort of semi-regular to do. So there's a lot of talk about more government advisement when it comes to things like custody matters, tax matters, innovation. So there's a lot of good pressure being met on a governmental level.
Yeah, that's good.
There's a strong, like I said, there's good strong business VC support as well. one of the things my job is to tap into some of that Web3 accelerator ecosystems and stuff. And, you know, the developers and the developer teams, the established ones I've met already, you know, are really appreciative that XDC is reaching out and sort of taking the time to explain what our unique points of differences are. And yeah, it's, you know, there's a lot of great stuff happening in Australia. So, and like I mentioned with the trade digitization, so education is just a really important thing, and that's a big part of my job. But yeah, dealing with the local economy and the local industry, there's a lot to be done. But yeah. I think if we kind of maintain the best bits of blockchain and make it stick, so en masse, I think, you know, I've done my job, and as blockchain proponents like yourself, you know, that's the best we can hope for. We don't necessarily need a watering down of blockchain or Web3. We don't want a fake Web3. We want something as practically best as possible that meets that, or at least is moving in that direction. So yeah, it's and that goes throughout, not just the actual protocol level, that goes through governance, and that goes through community. So
everything, yeah.
There seems to be a bit of spooking that's going on in the local Web3 sector as well, especially, you know, some businesses, exchanges in particular. In Australia, it tends to be very much exchange focused, you know, centralized exchange focused over the last 5 or 6 years in particular. And
where's that spooking coming from? Is it coming from the government, officials?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of well-meaning government and I guess advisory types. You know, I wouldn't say cynically that it's necessarily fueled by the incumbents or, you know, the financial incumbents in particular, but you know, some of these exchanges have actually gone offshore, set up shop, and still offer accounts and you know, things like that in Australia. But there seems to be a lot of stuff that got driven offshore. So, you know, Australia tends to lament itself and is a little bit down the dumps a little bit with when it comes to, you know, the amount of entities that stay and build here. But if Immutable can do it, then I don't think there's a great deal of problem. There's probably a lot of pain points to get through to get that done. But yeah, I mean, yeah, and there's a simplified trade system, which is a government advisory when it comes to digital exports, trade exports, and then the whole import side of things as well. So at times they've been maligned for being slow to react, but they're doing the best they can. And a lot of it's to do with the adoption of the model law of electronic transferable records, the MLETR, as well. So, you know, there's only so much we can do, and the advisories and the other chains can do. Some of it is sort of being held up a little bit by the legal stuff, especially when we're looking at how the tax office, you know, looks at, you know, assets as property and things like that. But, you know, real world assets are becoming a super hot topic. There's only so long that Australia will sit on the sidelines. I've already had conversations just this morning, even follow-up conversations about tokenizing renewables, and I've had conversations with locals about tokenizing soil credits. So we're on a wave, Brian, and it's literally just a matter of the enterprise and the government regulations coming together. But it's something which I think there's a real appetite to come together and bring that innovation, workable, productive market for Australians. So I'm optimistic.
Studying other blockchain projects, I like what XDC is doing. It's like they've really taken an initiative with Australia.
Yeah, I think it's understandable. Look, Australia has an interesting, perceived image, I guess, around the world, and you can only understand it if you've travelled as an Australian. A lot of Australians who don't travel tend to see what we do here is super important to the rest of the world, and when you travel, you realise that there's a lot of other regions in the world which are super important as well.
Absolutely.
I guess every country tends to be a bit like that. They have this over exaggeration of their importance.
Yeah.
That being said, it's very clear that Australia gets used. Maybe it's some sort of global marketing ploy. We certainly get our fair share of being used as the golden child of certain things, whether it be sustainability or the golden child of through COVID, how certain parts of Australia were very, very rigorous, let's say, when it came to dealing with COVID. But yeah, there is. I think the XDC network understands that Australia has we're a great exporter. We're a great exporter of primary goods. The primary industries, of beef, is alone, is a significant export, and then obviously all the agricultural and mineral sectors. So, it's obvious that any blockchain or any Web3 conversation that doesn't involve Australia is missing a huge chunk. There's obviously XDC is just so strongly trade focused. We need Australia to stand up, much like the UK. It's stood up in the last 12 months and show itself to be a willing and ready partner for digitalization.
Yeah, and it seems like things in the United States are moving along, but it's still a very slow process. But it is what it is.
Yeah, you sound Canadian. Actually, are you?
Sorry.
You actually sound Canadian. Are you American or?
Oh yeah. Well, my family's originally from Illinois, so they got that northern accent. Yeah. Okay. But I'm in Florida.
Okay. Well, Canada probably not so much, but definitely USA. It almost seems like you guys have been held up to kind of allow these rest of these regions perhaps to catch up, perhaps. But once America starts sort of, I think Europe needs to go first. France.
The SEC has not been crypto friendly at all, and it's kind of manipulating the situation, if you ask me, because they want to take reins over it. They want to pick winners and losers, but
it definitely seems like an overreach. Yeah, I think we can all agree on the overreach aspect. Yeah. But I was just about to say, Europe, I think, will probably, and the UK especially, will definitely sort of adopt quicker than the States. And I just read this morning, actually, that the MLETR legislation has actually been put in front of the French Parliament now, as of awesome. the last 24 hours. And I think everyone kind of knew that France would be next, and Germany and Japan are obviously within touching distance, expectation-wise, to get that. And obviously for the viewers and the audience, the MLETR going legal into these countries essentially means that these countries can now start receiving digital documents in the legally accepted digital trade, international trade thing. So yeah, another country being able to accept blockchain-based trade is only going to be great for XDC.
Do you see mass adoption coming to Australia with it by 2030?
Yeah, 2030. Yeah, I do. I do actually. See the landscape? Yeah. Look, obviously, some of that is going to be highly contingent on the next couple of years of really positioning XDC Network as the trade digitalization go-to here in Australia, and I do believe we've got the key players in place to do that, and I'm very much in touch and close to that whole apparatus of making that conversation stick with government and other agencies. And that will also mean bureaucratic processes will then start to feel the confidence and the importance of going paperless. So, connected industries or sectors like border defense and biosecurity, which, as I mentioned earlier, Australia being such a strong minerals and agricultural and livestock exporter and importer, I guess, to some degree. But yeah, those internal governmental departments will probably then go paperless as well. So our export, confidence in our exporting through something like XDC Trade Network will then obviously yield well for that more bureaucratic government adoption of paperless with XDC. Given also our subnets and our private and public networks, I think that will be super huge. Actually, I think that would be our main route to government integration. So that's my strategy.
Excellent. Okay.
And I think there's a fair few corporates that are sniffing around subnets as well.
Can you please explain the subnets? Like, is that better for security, conducting business on a chain, or what are the subnets?
Okay. So what we're doing is allowing that protocol to really flesh out its private and public states. So that was always, the pathway for XDC as a network. But they've really nailed it down and bolted that down now. And it kind of means that we have compartmentalized and we're allowed to secure certain parts of the network for an institution to therefore run all its transactions and communications internally without, any public exposure. And then once then it can basically bridge into a public state as well. I use the word bridge, but it's no bridge. It's basically
it's all part of the network.
It's all part of the same network.
Okay. So it's secure.
It's in a sense a firewall, so to speak. So I think it's more about convenience. I see it's the roll-ups that the EVM layer 2s do is they sacrifice the security because they're not using the full Ethereum network node structure to kind of provide that level of security. So you can have a subnet on XDC and take advantage of the complete decentralized network and the delegated proof of stake. So on that sense, when you compare apples to apples, it's puts XDC very much in a stronger position.
Much stronger,
as it's like having, it's pretty simple, but we have also the ability to kind of increase scaling if you want to sort of section off certain parts of your net to sort of certain functions. That will, it's proposed that will certainly increase scaling as well and transactions per second.
Most about XDC's technology, and what do you love about this awesome community?
Well, I think I might have mentioned this at the beginning, but it's really prides itself as being a community-driven network, and it doesn't surprise me because when I first found XDC and did the research, I realized its mission was very much about the SME, and once I kind of got to know the founders a little bit, just through other research and conversations, I realized that the roots of XDC Network is like a blue-collar entrepreneurship. It's tech that's been designed to make the digital economy secure, sustainable, and efficient, and I think they're all very commendable aspirations, and they've worked through some of the difficulties, and they've worked through, and they're achieving these. That resonates. That really resonates. It's one thing to try and talk that talk, but then to walk it. So I believe I've done my due diligence. Other people might have, more cynical takes, and maybe XDC hasn't covered itself in glory every single step of the way. But again, it's a journey, it's a process, and I do believe that this Web3 era is not going to be won through marketing and clever sort of branding. It's going to be through persistence and through commitment, and meeting those goals and those missions. And XDC ticks all those boxes for me. It's cheap, it's efficient to run, smart tokenomics, and it is obvious that there is a humanity behind the technology that makes the difference. The founders seem to have built this network from the ground up, and using their business and technological nous, they built it up through that. They certainly kept true and maintained that spirit. It's actually no surprise that they went into trade finance, because it just seems like that is the sort of most, common denominator of what XDC is. It's real people who are just trying to get the job done, and that pretty much resonates with everybody. And what's more sort of empowering than having your own business or having your own ideas? It's almost like the blockchain that rewards entrepreneurial spirit and private enterprise. It just so happens that it's a very strong, stable, and secure infrastructure opportunity for governments and bureaucracies as well. So it's almost like the network for everyone and every person. But that's what I love most about the whole story and the technology. The fact that they're moving towards that DAO. And I've been part of that process since I've come aboard over the last 8 months, and it's really great to see the inside workings of that as well, because it's going to have a trilateral governance structure, and they've done a lot of research to kind of find best practices and integrate them into something modern and contemporary, and that's going to be representative and equitable. And I really hope that people dig it, because I can see it being a really good way to kind of, look at grant requests, grant proposals, and other really meaningful uses of the network's time and resources. So DAOFin will be fantastic for the community. That in itself is a fine example of the spirit of decentralization and fair representation. And it's about time that we have one through here on XDC Network.
Son, it was a pleasure having you on the show, and I'm sure that the audience enjoyed it too. As well.
I hope so. Thank you, Brian. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. And again, it was a pleasure, and maybe you could be on the show again sometime in the future.
Obviously, my door's open, Brian, and I just want to thank the audience for sort of their attention, and hopefully they all learned something and got to know XDC better, and maybe a little bit of a snapshot of what's happening here in Australia and Asia Pacific. Thank you so much.